This is an activity that I use with my developmental writing class to help them understand how to write thesis statements, but it's actually an activity that any class could use where essay writing is involved, particularly if it's in the beginning stages of writing an essay. In this activity, my students are writing a cause and effect essay. So as we start the assignment, what I usually do is make sure that they understand that the outcome of this is that they're going to wind up with a thesis statement that they can actually use in their essay. To prepare for this, a couple of days prior to the class cooperative learning activity, I will give a mini lecture on how to write effective thesis statements, and I also have a handout that I give so that the students can see examples of good thesis statements. Also prior to this day, I will give them a list of topics from which they can choose one. And I usually, depending on the size of the class, I will give them around 5 or 6 topics that they can pick from. And the reason that I limit it is because since they're going to be working in groups, I need to make sure that at least 2 people are using the same topic. And that's how the groups are put together. From this list of topics, they will choose one, and then they turn that into me the class meeting prior to the activity. I then take a look at the topics everyone has chosen, and this is how I form the group. Typically with cooperative learning, you're either going to have base groups, formal groups, or informal groups. Well, in this activity, the groups are based on which topic that they chose. For instance, if 2 or 3 people choose reasons that relationships fail, then that will be one group. Everybody will be working on the same topic to create a thesis statement from. The only materials that the students will need will be a paper and pen. They will already know which topic that they chose, and so when they come into class, they know that the activity they will be doing will be to work together to create a thesis statement for the paper. As they start the activity, when they first come into the classroom, I already know who's going to be in the groups, and so I will have the desks situated so that they can have the right number of seats for their group. With this activity that you're going to be seeing on the video, the group size varies because I may have only had 2 students choose a certain topic where maybe 4 students chose another one, and so that's why the groups are not the same size. They begin working on their thesis statements in these groups, and remember, they already know ahead of time what a good thesis statement is. They've seen examples of good thesis statements, so they can just right away start discussing their topic, start discussing what they think will work as far as forming a thesis statement with the particular topic that that group is using. What they do is they come up with one thesis statement that they can use later in their essay. Now, the group does not have to use the exact same thesis statement in the essay that they turn in later. They do have to agree on one thesis statement, however, to turn into me so that I can see that the whole group understands how a thesis statement works. Typically what happens though is, since I have already instructed them that thesis statements can be worded in lots of different ways, the group usually comes up with an individual thesis statement for everybody, but they also come up with one group thesis statement that they all agree on. In addition, I also have them to brainstorm topics that they can use to develop their essay, because that would be the next stage after writing their thesis statement. So I typically ask them to come up with at least 5 subtopics. For example, if they're doing reasons that relationships fail, I would have them to come up with 5 or 6 different reasons that relationships fail. And that not only gets them through their thesis statement, but it also gives them a plan of development for their essay that they can use later on. Because one of the things that they learn about writing a thesis statement is that it can include a list of subtopics as part of that statement, and then I just let them decide whether or not they want to use the subtopics as part of their thesis statement or just leave it as it is. One of the things that I really like about this activity is that it uses several elements of cooperative learning. Positive interdependence is very important in this activity, because without that, the product would not be finished. The students are counting on each other, they're helping each other out, they're talking about the topic, they're deciding together what makes an effective thesis statement. But individual accountability is also very important, because when it comes down to it, when this assignment is graded is when I see the thesis statement in their final essay that they turn in on their own, because each student then takes that thesis statement and develops into its own essay. And so that's where the individual accountability comes in. Face-to-face promotive interaction is also very important in this activity, because this activity leads later on to others. Because as this essay develops, these groups get back together to see how their supporting paragraphs are being developed, to help each other come up with details, and also to write an effective conclusion. And so these groups continue to meet several class meetings after this one, so that they can see how each other's essays are developing and to help each other come up with good content. Interpersonal skills, of course, play a very important part in this activity. You have students of all different levels of social skills, and this is a good opportunity for students who may be more shy or who may not feel quite as group worthy, so to speak, that they can realize that they have something important to say, especially since I feel that they come into this activity well prepared in presenting their ideas and just giving an idea of what they think a good thesis statement sounds like, because there's no one good answer as far as writing a thesis statement. Thesis statements are very effective, written a variety of ways, and so students are validated with what they think about how effective thesis statements can happen. As I mentioned earlier, this is such a good activity for any class that has to write an essay, because as I know from talking with many of my colleagues here, thesis statements seem to be a concern, making sure that students write effective thesis statements, because without one, it is difficult to develop a good essay. So any class, psychology, history, of course other English classes, but really any class in which students are writing an essay, this is a wonderful activity, because if you are giving them certain topics to pick from, the groups form themselves. The students will be able to work together to see what sounds like a powerful statement that they can use, and then depending on how you want the class to work, they can even go on and develop their subtopics and even the content together, so that even though they'll be producing an individual essay at the end of it, they work together throughout the process. And especially if it's the first essay that the class has written, it just makes it a lot easier and takes a lot of the stress off of the students if they know that they're going to be able to work together to get the ideas going and then turn in their final product.